suit and tie and get your hair cut way up high. Get yourself a lawyer, son. You're gonna need a real good one.
And we've got a virtual one for you today. David Whiting is not here with me in the studio. He's down the line and by virtue of Facebook. Hello, Facebook. Great to have you streaming us live. You can see me and you can see him and I can see him too. David Whiting, hello.
Hello.
Are you looking at the camera?
If I look at now, I'm looking at the camera. How's that? Is that more better? Okay.
That's much more betterer. Thank you for that.
I shall change. Yep.
How are you?
I'm very well, but I had I met somebody last week who's off having a COVID test.
Oh.
And so I thought that in the great scheme of things, it made more sense for me not to potentially infect the ABC building.
That would not be a good thing for us, for you, for anything really. So
I wouldn't know what to ring you about tomorrow if there had been a problem.
Oh, no, imagine. That's what they call a bad look if you came in. So thank you for doing the right thing. And a reminder to everyone, if you have any symptoms at all, go and get the COVID test and stay home until you get the result, as should close people with you as well. What's happening in the world of the law, David?
Well, I'm really watching with interest what's happening in Canberra. It's just I don't really know. It's just I worry about the law and I worry about spin, and the amount of spin that's going on is amazing.
What are you referring to in particular?
Well, I'm interested in the. I looked at what the Prime Minister says about the Cabinet Minister who's entitled to a presumption of innocence. And then I compare that with the statement he made last week about one particular member's chief of staff who should go because the accusation is a taint. And it seemed to me it ought to be the standard that you apply to both of them. Whichever one you apply, you should apply to both.
Yeah,
and I can see arguments for both propositions.
Yeah, I think it's a fair observation. There are inconsistencies galore over this, particularly if you think back to how the person who was accused by Brittany Higgins of a violent sexual assault, the treatment of that person who was immediately shuffled out. So, yeah, you've got a massive problem there. How does this get resolved in the absence of a complainant to speak to, in court, the statement made to police? How would one proceed with a matter so you can actually get it properly heard, and also so someone gets a proper and vigorous legal defence?
Well, you're never actually going to get a hearing because there is no principal witness. There is no evidence. There isn't going to be sufficient evidence for you to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt. I think that's incredibly unlikely, and absent being able to have a further discussion with the complainant, the New South Wales Police won't be able to take the matter any further. So I was really impressed with the approach taken by the High Court last year when there were accusations made about a retired High Court judge when he was in office.
That's right.
So they conducted their own inquiry, and I thought that was a brilliant way to resolve the issue.
Yeah, and the government, of course, the Prime Minister has called at least 3 inquiries. I don't know if any of those meet your marker for comparing with the Dyson Heydon matter in the High Court?
No, none of them do. I've looked at, I look at that, and that seems to me to be absolutely straight down the line. No one had a vested interest. No one was protecting themselves on the way through, and we got the former Inspector General of Intelligence, who I would have thought would have had a very sharp mind to bring to that.
And who actually now has some experience in conducting such a review. You could bring them straight in.
Yeah, absolutely. They could start tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep.
David Whiting is your talkback lawyer, and he's here to dispense some free legal advice. 1300 222 774. I've got one line free if you'd like to try and wriggle on board. Let's start with Linda in Northcote. Linda, good morning. What's the problem?
Yes, hello. I have a daughter who's ended a tenancy February 15th after 2 years rental, and she's having difficulty recovering her bond. Now, the rental agent keeps coming up with excuses after the fact that the inspection turned up no complaints, but then, of course, she needs the bond for her new place.
Linda, the bond should be held by the Tenancy Bond Authority. It shouldn't be held by the agent. And your daughter could go to VCAT for a release of the bond, so for an order that the bond be paid over. If you'd like to put some collateral pressure on the agent, which is where I would be starting, I would probably be going to Consumer Affairs, to business licensing, and say, I've got a complaint about an estate agent who won't give me back the bond in circumstances where the final inspection met all their requirements.
Right.
Linda?
I'm worried about a queue at VCAT.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
So-
that's what she's worried about as well.
So put your pressure on the agent and say, I'm going to business licensing Victoria unless you fix my problem pronto. And is it possible that I paid you a bond that you haven't paid to the Bond Authority? Because that will be an offence along the way as well.
Be nice to find that out. Linda, good luck with that. I'll keep taking your calls and David will keep advising you, but let me very quickly speak to Richard Willingham, our ABC political reporter, who's been in the lockup looking at the final report that's now been tabled, that was being conducted into the Victoria's mental health system, the Royal Commission report that's just been tabled. Richard Willingham, good morning. What's it found?
Good morning, Virginia. It's found that the system has catastrophically failed to live up to expectations. It operates in crisis mode, it's hard to access, and basically the whole system needs to be rebuilt. And one of the major focuses it calls for among the 65 recommendations is more focus on community-based.
Got a real problem with the line this morning. I don't know if we can try and get him back on. No. Man, I hate those lines. But Richard's been in the lockup this morning, so he has had a number of hours to look very carefully at the final report from the Royal Commission. And as he just mentioned, I guess the headline says it all, that the system has catastrophically failed to live up to expectations and must be rebuilt. But how? I guess we have to hope that the 65 recommendations point out some sort of roadmap, a blueprint for how we would rebuild the services, the state's mental health services, so that we're no longer over-reliant on medication and other things. You're back on the line there, Richard?
Hello, sorry. Technology is wonderful, isn't it?
Oh, I just love it. Go on.
Where we're up to, but one of the big focuses on community-based services. So people don't have to travel a long way to get help. If their mental illness isn't that severe, it can be dealt with in the community. There's also a bit of focus on the justice system. They need to expand the Thomas Embling Hospital, I think 107 new beds over a decade. There's also one of the important things is they're trying to phase out the use of restraints and seclusion, and as well as trying to make compulsory medication, really trying to focus on that as a last resort. Recommendations to around when someone's having a mental health crisis, and if it's a triple O call, it should be the calls be directed to ambulance rather than police. We've seen those incidents where police are confronted with people who are having a psychological episode, and that can be very distressing for both the person and police. So addressing around that. One of the things that the Commission heard over a long time, Virginia, was that the fact that services in the centre of Melbourne might be quite good, but if you live outside of Melbourne in country Victoria or even some suburbs, it's not as good. So there is a recommendation to provide financial incentives to attract and retain mental health workers and wellbeing support workers into the bush. So all of this is going to cost a lot of money. We're talking billions of dollars. The government says it's going to accept all 65 recommendations plus the 9 we had a couple of years ago, but they haven't spelt out exactly how and what sort of timeframes. And that's to come later today. There's a lot in this, Virginia. It's a big report, and it is basically about rebuilding the whole system from scratch.
Wow, that's a massive challenge. And as you say, billions of dollars. The ambulance system itself would, or the staffing levels would have to be rebuilt too, Richard, to take account of ambulances responding to crisis calls rather than police and everything else besides. We just heard this morning from David Hayward at RMIT University, the Victorian budget is in a pretty good state. So that's at least one good thing to hear. Maybe the government can afford it.
Well, that's the thing, and one of the recommendations from the interim report was about introducing a tax or a levy to pay for some of this. I wonder if that is politically going to happen now, or wonder if they'll just add it to the big debt bill they've already got to pay for COVID and infrastructure. I wonder if they'll just add a few more billion to that and find out a bit later today. There's a lot to digest, and I think people who have had lived experience, have obviously spoken a lot to your program about their experiences and whether this hits the mark. We'll find out in the coming hours as this document is digested. It's 5 volumes. I think it's 13 kilos when you pick it up.
Wow.
It's just a lot. They also want, significantly in the Parliament, they want to rewrite the whole Mental Health and Wellbeing Act. It needs to be repealed and rewritten. There's going to be a Mental Health and Wellbeing Commissioner and Commission established, and that will sort of act as a watchdog for complaints. There'll be a new Chief Mental Health Officer within the Department of Health, which will act as sort of a Deputy Secretary. There's a lot of sort of bureaucratic changes too, and there's a lot around promotion of wellbeing and mental health. And that one of the things when creating all of these new programs and all of these new laws, that it needs to be mindful of being culturally diverse and aware of it's not one size fits all. They need to renovate a whole lot of the existing infrastructure, the actual bricks and mortar, to make sure that it's segregated for gender too. It raises that as an issue that too often too many people are just thrown in one system together. It's about 100 beds across the community to help with more acute services. And it also, a bit like the aged care review yesterday, talks about the need to have a model where people can get at home or in bed care away from hospitals.
Which is
trying to reduce, which is a lovely thing to say, but that's the really big logistical. And on top of this, is this going to require a huge workforce? And who's going to pay for that as well, and who's going to train, and who's going to want to do this? So it's going to require a huge, not just reform of the system, but reform, I think, of the way people think about mental health and think about that as an option,
a complete
as a career.
rejig of it all. Richard, really great to get that summation of it. Thank you so much.
Pleasure as always.
Richard Willingham there, ABC political reporter. Rafi, of course, will have more on this, a massive and very important report that has just been tabled, looking at our utterly broken mental health system. When you pair that with the Royal Commission yesterday finding the utterly broken aged care system, you do wonder, you've got to ask yourself the question, what have successive governments been doing for years? What have we as a community been doing and ignoring for years to end up with expensive, unwieldy, but in the end failing systems? It's a really dismaying conclusion that you have to draw. Let's take more of your calls and get you a bit of legal advice this morning. Meryl is in Box Hill South. Hi, Meryl.
Hello. My problem is to do with cutting back the growth that runs along my fence line. My house runs off the main road, and there was another house off the main road and the side road. So they've both been, the other house has been knocked down and two properties built on them. Then they've both grown stuff right up against the fence line, growing over it. I needed my gutters and spout and, downpipes cleaned. That was all. I have, when going my drive, there's a carport and then a garage, and they were both covered with this growth. So the company sent out a guy who could do both things and cut things back. The lady at the back was fine. I couldn't get into my carport because there was a great amount of stuff growing out over the fence, which underneath has very thick branches.
I think we need to just get to the point here, the question.
So the point is that he cut back a little bit beyond the fence line because of these very thick branches,
yes.
about 10 centimetres. The next door neighbour has gone ballistic because it wasn't on the fence line and wants to sue the guy who did the cutting.
What was the plant that was cut back? Meryl?
Sorry?
What was the plant that was cut back? What kind of plant?
Well, I don't know. It's a very tall, bushy thing with very thick branches.
Meryl, had it been... I just don't see that the neighbour's going to do anything at all. What you're saying, 10 centimetres is 4 inches, so nobody's really cut a huge swathe back. And yes, there is going to be an action for trespass and an action for damages. The action for trespass will be dealt with by a promise that I'm not going to do it again, and he hasn't suffered any loss and damage. And your other argument is that my planting is now slightly smaller than it was before. That's going to result in in a sense, a nominal damages. I would have, if I was acting for your neighbour, I would have come along and said, wait 12 months and it'll grow back. So I just don't see it's a realistic claim. I understand it as a tantrum, and I also know that you could be equally upset by all of the growth that you've put up with for all that period of time.
So you're saying just write it out, David?
Just write it out. I just don't see that the developer next door, the person who owns the property next door, is going to get much sympathy in going to a court saying, my tree's been damaged in an action of trespass, right?
Okay. Meryl, you happy with that?
Yes, it was because it grew so far over I couldn't get in my carport.
Yeah, no.
Oh, no, I mean, one could come along and say,
Yeah.
you've got an action for trespass too, but I'd come along and say it would be easier and cheaper for you to pay someone to cut it back and throw it over the fence than it would be to get a court order that your neighbour cut it back.
All right, so I think this is a hold your nerve bit of advice there. Lynn in Brunswick, good morning.
Good morning. I've got a really great relationship with my neighbours. I live in a row of joined single terraces, corrugated iron roofs. My roof plumber was on the roof applying silver rust-inhibiting paint. He worked his way down the box guttering. His rubber gloves left silver traces all over the neighbour's new charcoal Colorbond roof. Now, he's been up to try and remedy it. Nothing worked, nothing comes off. They've got a rooftop patio, so it's very evident to them when they're up there. What are the next steps with the damage that can't be fixed at the moment on their charcoal roof?
The only thing that I can suggest is that you would paint over it. But I know that's not a legal answer.
Yes, I think we need to sort of find out Apparently you can't paint over this stuff. It's a plumber's specific material, but surely the Colorbond people would know what does work on...
Can you see it from the street? Can you only see it if you're on the roof?
No, they can see it from their rooftop patio, and I totally agree. I'd be furious. They only bought the property about 12 months ago, so it looks rather tacky, yeah.
David?
I would be going to the people who make it, and because they are the people who will know how you might get rid of it. And it might be something that you need to scrape off.
Correct. I'll go back to him and ask him to do a little bit of homework because I totally understand how they feel. Thanks, David. Thanks, Virginia.
No, that's great. And Lynn, good on you for not turning this into a big legal fight between you and your neighbour. It seems to me, David, that relationship, if it's a good one, keeping that good relationship,
absolutely.
Crucial, more important than any paint anywhere, worth all the money that you need to spend. Derek is in Croydon. What's happening there, Derek?
Oh, thanks for taking my call. I've had a property that I've leased to one of the hospitals for the last 15 years. About 6 years ago, they issued a compulsory acquisition on the property, which means I can't I can't sell it to anyone other than the hospital, and I can't really lease it to anyone else because they may decide to compulsorily acquire it and bulldoze it. So every 2 years, I have this issue about won't they renew the lease, and I'm up to the 2-year point again where they're doing the...
So Derek, you haven't got a compulsory acquisition notice. What they've done is they've put a planning overlay that says this land is potentially going to be acquired. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
But I can't,
if you had received a
sell to
compulsory
anyone else.
acquisition notice, you could stick your hand up for the money.
Yeah, I've asked them a number of times. I've met with their finance officer and asked them to go ahead and acquire it. And
Yes.
they tell me that they've got no budget funds, they can't acquire it.
I think that's technically their problem, Derek, but if you could wait till next week, I'll give you a better answer, because there is a process for applying for compensation. And there was a case decided in the Supreme Court about a month ago in circumstances where the compulsory acquisition notice was, or the public acquisition overlay was put on the land, and then the person died, and the question was, did his beneficiaries have the right to continue the claim? So if you can wait till next week, I'll give you a better answer.
All right, good. So we'll take that one on notice. Thank you very much. Denise in Mount Martha has a Body Corporation question. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Virginia. Hi, David. Unfortunately, it's a body corporate, and I think everybody's over it. But look, I don't own my front garden. The body corporate does, and there's this magnificent gum tree in the front, and I don't want it cut down. It's been trimmed because some of the branches were too large and were a threat to the house with the extreme wind weather we've had. However, it leaves a whole lot of, can I say, crap on the ABC on my roof, and I asked the body corporate, would they please pay for my roof to be cleaned once or twice a year? It builds up and it's clogged. I've just had it cleaned.
Yes.
I've had it cleaned at my expense, but I'm wondering if I have any legal...
Yes, you do.
Pardon?
You do have a claim against the Owners Corporation for the damage. In a sense, the Owners Corporation is your neighbour. Your neighbour has a tree that's making a mess of your property, and you can go to them and say, I need you to fix the cost of my guttering.
Right. Well, they're stonewalling me at the moment, and I'm not about to be stonewalled any longer. I'm just
There's a dispute resolution process contained in Part 7 of the Model Rules for owners corporations. So you can find that without any difficulty. So Model Rules Owners Corporation will give you a copy, and there's a process that you can follow, and essentially you either have a meeting with the grievance committee of the Owners Corporation or with the Owners Corporation. And I say it's a cost of husbanding the tree.
Right.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. That's
No
really
worries.
good. Thank you.
We hope that resolves things for you. George is calling in from Ballarat. What's happening there, George?
Oh, hello. First of all, thanks for doing those 2 reports. That's really important stuff.
Okay.
A little less important, I'm starting a relationship and it will be de facto. I have children, she has children. I want to leave what I have to my children, and I think it's important I don't have any claim on her money. She earned it, it's hers. I saw a country solicitor about this, and he said to arrange this would cost me about $600 and her $1,000. Is there an easier way?
Let's cut this into 2 parts, can we?
Sure.
It is possible to enter into a binding financial agreement that covers the breakdown of the relationship. So if this relationship should come to an end, then the agreement will cover what it is that you get. But I would have thought at $600 and $1,000 it would be awfully cheap. But the bit that you can't protect about is what happens if the relationship ends by the death of one party.
Yeah.
Because that's a relationship consequence governed by state law, and the question is whether or not you are making, whether you fulfil your moral obligation to your partner by leaving them nothing.
Okay.
Right? So we can fix the breakdown of the relationship by having a binding financial agreement that you process in accordance with the Family Law Act, and that locks it in with an incredibly high probability of succeeding. But it doesn't fix the death problem.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
But
So if you were to die first, then the question will be, have you made adequate provision? Have you fulfilled your moral obligations to your partner?
Okay, so in the end I'm sort of, caught between 2 stools. Yes.
But what if George and his partner agree that they don't agree before each of them die or even make this will, that they don't have an obligation to each other?
You can't contract out of the obligation. You could prepare a document that says we agree that the wills that we've made are reasonable and leave us with adequate financial resources that you might even refer to in the document. That would be an awfully good start.
Okay.
But let's come along and let's say that you've invested all of your shares in one of the major banks, or a very significant blue chip company, and you've based your asset position on that, and that something goes wrong and your share portfolio drops to 10% of its value. Are you now being adequately? We've changed your financial circumstances, so there might be a moral obligation. So I would start with an agreement to make wills in a particular form, an agreement for mutual wills. You might choose to spell out in that document what your financial position will be and what you might expect to have at the end, and then you could have an analysis as to whether I think that's reasonable or not.
George, it sounds like spending the money on the will is actually money well spent.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay.
David, is that where you're heading with that? Are you just touting for your fellow lawyers here?
No, I had somebody in yesterday who had exactly the same question.
Right.
And the question to me was, if we're looking at 10 or 15 years out, you can't be absolutely certain that the arrangements you're putting in today, in place today, will meet your moral obligation in 15 years' time.
Or your changed financial circumstances, or indeed the changed financial circumstances of your children.
Yes.
Yeah. David, great to have you on board as always, and very nice to have you back. Hopefully the COVID test news is good, and we'll see you here in the studio next week.
Thanks.
David Whiting there.